Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we begin today's attack report, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe. Also, write now in the comments which city you're watching from. We'd love to know. All of this because the moment I stepped out of my truck, the dense Oregon forest loomed before me, its ancient trees reaching towards a sky hidden by a thick canopy. A chill ran down my spine, not from the crisp autumn air, but from an inexplicable sense of foreboding. The shadows between the trees seemed to writhe and twist, concealing untold terrors just beyond my sight. "Hey Michael, you gonna stand there all day? Or are we gonna hunt?" Jake's voice snapped me out of my trance. I shook my head, trying to clear the ominous thoughts. "Yeah, sorry. Just taking in the view," I replied, forcing a smile as I grabbed my backpack and rifle from the truck bed. Our group of 5, Jake, Sarah, Tom, Derek, and myself, had been planning this hunting trip for months. We were deep in the Willamette National Forest, miles from the nearest town or cell signal. As an experienced hunter, I'd been in plenty of remote locations before, but something about this place felt different. We shouldered our packs and began our trek into the wilderness. The crunch of leaves beneath our feet echoed through the silent woods, each step taking us deeper into the unknown. The forest seemed to swallow all other sounds, creating an eerie vacuum that set my nerves on edge. "Is it just me? Or is it weirdly quiet?" Sarah whispered, her eyes darting nervously between the trees. Tom chuckled, but it sounded forced. "Probably just scared all the critters away with our racket. They'll be back once we set up camp." As we hiked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig made me whirl around, expecting to see something. But there was never anything there, just shadows and silence. After a few hours of trekking, we found a suitable clearing to set up camp. As we worked to pitch our tents and organize our gear, that creeping sensation of being observed intensified. I kept glancing over my shoulder, peering into the deepening gloom of the forest. "You okay, Michael?" Derek asked, noticing my unease. "You seem jumpy." I hesitated, not wanting to sound paranoid. "It's nothing. Just, have you guys felt like something's off about this place?" Jake laughed, slapping me on the back. "Come on, man. Don't tell me you're buying into all those Bigfoot stories we heard back in town." I forced a smile, but his words didn't comfort me. If anything, they made the shadows seem even more menacing. As night fell, we gathered around the campfire. The dancing flames cast flickering shadows on the surrounding trees, making them seem to move and shift in unnatural ways. We passed around a bottle of whiskey, trying to lighten the mood with casual conversation, but there was an underlying tension that wouldn't dissipate. "So," Tom said, his voice low and dramatic, "you guys want to hear about the legend of the Oregon Wildman?" Sarah groaned. "Do we have to? Those stories always freak me out." "Oh, come on," Jake chimed in. "It's just a bit of fun. Go ahead, Tom." Tom leaned forward, his face eerily illuminated by the firelight. "They say there's a creature that roams these woods. Part man, part beast, 8 feet tall, covered in thick matted fur. Some say it's a missing link, others think it's something not of this world." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool night air. Tom continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Hunters and hikers have gone missing in these parts. Those who survive tell tales of a monster with inhuman strength and a bone-chilling howl that echoes through the forest at night." As if on cue, a distant sound carried on the wind, a low, mournful cry that was neither human nor any animal I recognized. We all froze, our eyes wide as we stared into the darkness beyond our little circle of light. "Very funny, Tom," Sarah said, her voice shaky. "You arranged that, didn't you?" Tom shook his head slowly, his face pale. "I swear that wasn't me." An uncomfortable silence fell over our group. We tried to laugh it off, to convince ourselves it was just the wind or some unfamiliar forest animal. But deep down, I knew. Something was out there, watching us. As the fire died down, we reluctantly headed to our tents. I crawled into my sleeping bag, my mind racing with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. I tried to rationalize my fears, telling myself I was just letting Tom's story get to me. But every sound from the forest, every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, sent my heart racing. Just as I was about to drift off into an uneasy sleep, I heard it again. A howl, closer this time, that sent shivers down my spine. It was a sound that didn't belong in this world, a cry of hunger, of rage, of something ancient and primal. With trembling hands, I zipped up my tent as if that thin layer of fabric could protect me from whatever was out there. I lay awake for hours, straining my ears for any sign of approach, any indication that the thing in the woods was getting closer. As exhaustion finally began to overtake me, one thought kept repeating in my mind. What have we gotten ourselves into? Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would change our lives forever. Groggily, I unzipped my tent and stumbled out into the crisp morning air. The first rays of dawn were just beginning to filter through the dense canopy, casting long shadows across our campsite. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I froze in shock. Circling our entire camp were massive, unexplainable footprints. They were easily twice the size of my own boot, with a depth that suggested something of immense weight had made them. The prints formed a perfect perimeter around our tents, as if whatever had left them had been studying us while we slept. "What the hell?" Sarah whispered, her face pale as she crouched next to one of the prints. Tom shook his head in disbelief. This has to be some kind of joke, right? Maybe some locals trying to scare us city folk? But I knew better. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I remembered the inhuman howl from the night before. These prints were fresh, and whatever made them was real. Let's just stick to the plan, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We came here to hunt, so let's hunt. The others nodded, eager for a distraction from the unsettling discovery. We grabbed our gear and headed into the forest, following a deer trail we'd spotted the day before. As we moved deeper into the woods, an uneasy silence fell over our group. The usual chorus of bird song and insect buzzing was noticeably absent. It was as if every living creature was holding its breath in fear, aware of a predator that we couldn't yet see. Anyone else notice how quiet it is? Derek murmured, his eyes darting nervously between the trees. Before anyone could respond, I spotted fresh deer tracks. Look, I whispered, pointing to the ground. These are recent. Let's split up and see if we can flush it out. Stay within shouting distance. We spread out, moving carefully through the underbrush. I followed the deer tracks, my rifle at the ready, all senses on high alert. The silence of the forest was oppressive, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and heartbeat. Suddenly, a sickening odor hit me. The unmistakable stench of death and decay. I rounded a large boulder and stumbled upon a sight that turned my blood to ice. Before me lay the mangled carcass of a fully grown black bear. Its massive body had been torn apart as if it were made of paper, ribs exposed and limbs twisted at unnatural angles. No ordinary predator could have done this. The bear's claws and teeth were fearsome weapons, yet something had overpowered it with ease. I stared at the gruesome scene, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Whatever did this possessed strength beyond anything known in these woods? The realization hit me like a physical blow. We were not alone in this forest, and we were not at the top of the food chain. A twig snapped behind me, and I whirled around, rifle raised. It was just Jake, his face turning ashen as he saw the bear carcass. Jesus Christ, he breathed. What could have done this? I shook my head, unable to form words. The reality of our situation was beginning to sink in, and it was terrifying. We regrouped with the others and shared what we'd found. The mood shifted from excitement about the hunt to a palpable sense of fear. No one wanted to say it out loud, but we were all thinking the same thing. Maybe those Bigfoot stories weren't just legends after all. As we debated whether to continue the hunt or head back to camp, I noticed something odd about the forest ahead of us. There was a clear path of destruction cutting through the undergrowth, snapped branches, bent saplings, and disturbed earth. It looked as if something massive had barreled through, heedless of the obstacles in its way. "Look at this," I said, pointing out the trail. "Whatever did this, it's big, and it's heading deeper into the wilderness." Sarah shuddered. "Maybe we should go back. This doesn't feel right." Part of me wanted to agree, to pack up our gear and get as far away from this forest as possible. But another part, the part that had always been drawn to the thrill of the hunt, was morbidly curious. What was out there? "Let's follow it," I heard myself say. "Just for a little while. If we don't find anything, we'll head back." The others reluctantly agreed, and we set off along the path of destruction. With each step, the forest seemed to close in around us. The trees loomed overhead, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. The silence was absolute now, broken only by our cautious footsteps and the pounding of my own heart. As dusk approached, the forest grew darker, shadows lengthening and merging until it was hard to distinguish shapes in the gloom. We were about to call it quits when movement caught my eye. Between two ancient pines, something massive and hair-covered darted past. It was there and gone in an instant, moving with a speed that seemed impossible for its size. I caught a glimpse of matted fur, powerfully muscled limbs, and eyes that reflected the fading light like a predator's. "Did you see that?" I gasped, my rifle halfway to my shoulder. The others shook their heads, looking at me with a mixture of concern and fear. "What did you see, Michael?" Tom asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I opened my mouth to describe it, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I explain something that defied explanation? How could I tell them I'd seen a creature that shouldn't exist? I'm not sure, I finally managed. But whatever it was big and fast. Too fast to be human. A heavy silence fell over our group. The reality of our situation was sinking in. We were in grave danger, far from help, with night falling and something unnatural stalking the forest around us. "We need to get back to camp," Jake said, his usual bravado replaced by naked fear. "Now." As we turned to retrace our steps, a bone-chilling howl echoed through the forest. The same sound we'd heard the night before, but closer now, much closer. We broke into a run, crashing through the underbrush, all thoughts of stealth forgotten. As we fled, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being herded, driven like prey towards some unknown destination. We were running, our breaths coming in ragged gasps, the forest a blur around us as we desperately tried to find our way back to camp. The fading light made every shadow seem alive, every rustle of leaves a potential threat. Then, without warning, everything changed. A thick, unnatural fog began to roll in, enveloping the forest in a ghostly shroud. It came so suddenly, so densely, that within moments I could barely see my hand in front of my face. "Guys?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the mist. "Jake? Sarah? Can anyone hear me?" Silence was my only answer. The fog had separated me from my hunting companions, leaving me alone in this nightmarish forest. Panic clawed at my throat as I spun around, trying to get my bearings. "Stay calm," I muttered to myself, fighting to keep my breathing steady. "They can't be far. Just pick a direction and stick to it." I chose what I hoped was the path back to our camp and started walking, my rifle clutched tightly against my chest. The fog muffled all sound, creating an eerie, otherworldly atmosphere. Every step felt like I was wading through a sea of cotton, the world beyond arm's reach lost in the impenetrable mist. That's when I heard it. A thunderous sound, like trees being uprooted, moving through the forest around me. Whatever was making that noise was massive, and it was close. Too close. My heart hammered in my chest as I froze, straining my ears to pinpoint the direction of the sound. It seemed to be circling me, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, but always present. The rational part of my mind tried to explain it away. A bear perhaps, or some other large animal native to these woods. But deep down, I knew. This was something else entirely. With shaking hands, I fumbled for my flashlight. The beam cut through the fog, creating a small sphere of visibility around me. I swept it back and forth, searching for any sign of my friends, any familiar landmark that could guide me back to safety. The light caught something in the distance, a glint, a reflection. I focused the beam and my blood ran cold. A pair of eyes stared back at me from the darkness, glowing with an otherworldly intelligence. They were far too high off the ground to belong to any known animal, hovering at what must have been 8 or 9 feet in the air. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. The eyes blinked once, slowly, then vanished. "This isn't real," I whispered, my voice trembling. "This can't be real." But the growing stench assaulting my nostrils told me otherwise. The smell of wet fur and rotting meat filled the air, so strong it made my eyes water. It was the smell of a predator, of death, and it was getting stronger. With horrifying clarity, I realized I was being stalked. I started moving again, no longer caring about direction, only about putting distance between myself and whatever was out there in the fog. The sound of snapping branches and heavy footfalls followed me, always just out of sight but never far behind. "Hello?" I called out, desperation clear in my voice. "Is anyone there? Jake? Sarah? Tom? Derek?" Only the echo of my own voice answered me, mocking my fear. The fog seemed to thicken, if that was even possible. My world narrowed to the small circle of light from my flashlight and the sounds of pursuit behind me. I pushed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Suddenly, a bone-chilling roar shattered the silence. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, not quite animal, not quite human, but a terrifying blend of both. The sound reverberated through my body, freezing me in place for a crucial moment. When the echo of the roar faded, I could hear it clearly, heavy, rhythmic breathing and the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the forest, heading straight for me. Panic took over. I ran blindly through the fog-shrouded forest, all thoughts of direction or finding my way back to camp forgotten. My only goal was to get away, to put as much distance as possible between myself and the monster that was hunting me. I crashed through bushes, leaped over fallen logs, and splashed through shallow streams. The fog played tricks on my vision, making trees loom out of nowhere and casting strange, writhing shadows in the beam of my flashlight. "This isn't happening," I gasped between breaths. "This can't be happening." But it was. The creature's pursuit was relentless. Every time I thought I'd lost it, that bone-chilling roar would sound again, closer than before. The stench of its presence grew stronger, filling my nostrils and turning my stomach. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning in that fog-drenched nightmare. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror kept me moving. The forest seemed endless, a maze designed to trap me with this impossible predator. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, when my legs were about to give out, and my heart felt like it would burst from my chest, I saw something through the fog. A faint glow, steadier and warmer than my wildly swinging flashlight beam. Hope surged through me. "The campfire," I wheezed. "It has to be." With renewed energy, I pushed towards the light. The sounds of pursuit seemed to fade slightly, as if the creature was hesitant to approach the glow. As I got closer, I could make out voices, my friends, calling my name. "Here!" I tried to shout, but it came out as more of a croak. "I'm here!" I burst through the tree line into our campsite, collapsing to my knees. Jake and Sarah rushed to my side, their faces etched with concern. "Michael, what happened? Where have you been?" Jake asked, helping me to my feet. I opened my mouth to explain, to warn them about the monster in the woods, but the words wouldn't come. How could I describe what I'd just experienced? Would they even believe me? As my friends led me to the fire, fussing over my scratches and torn clothing, I glanced back at the forest. The fog was already starting to dissipate, but in the last wisps of mist, I swore I saw those glowing eyes again, watching me from just beyond the firelight's reach. A shudder ran through me as I realized this was far from over. Whatever was out there in those woods, it wasn't done with us yet. And as the night deepened around our fragile circle of light, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were no longer the hunters but the hunted. The night wore on, and despite the exhaustion seeping into my bones, sleep eluded me. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. The others tried to reassure me, but I could see the doubt and fear in their eyes. They hadn't seen what I had seen. As the first light of dawn crept through the trees, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to prove to myself, to all of them, that I wasn't losing my mind. "I'm going to check the perimeter," I announced, grabbing my rifle. Jake looked at me, concern etched on his face. "You sure that's a good idea, Michael? After what happened yesterday?" I cut him off. "I'll be fine. I need to do this." Before anyone could protest further, I strode into the forest. The morning mist clung to the ground, giving the woods an ethereal quality. I moved cautiously, every sense on high alert. That's when it happened. My foot caught on an exposed root, and I went down hard. As I pushed myself up, spitting out dirt, I froze. There, right in front of my face, was a set of footprints in the mud. But these weren't human tracks, nor any animal I recognized. They were enormous, easily twice the size of my own foot, with distinct toe impressions that sent a chill down my spine. "No," I whispered, scrambling backward. "No, no, no." As if in response to my denial, the forest around me suddenly came alive. The trees shook violently, their branches whipping back and forth as something massive barreled towards me through the underbrush. The ground trembled beneath me, and I could hear the snap and crack of wood giving way to an unstoppable force. I stumbled to my feet, my rifle forgotten in the mud as primal fear took over. But I wasn't fast enough. As I turned to run, I caught my first clear glimpse of the monster that had been haunting these woods. It burst through the tree line like a freight train, a towering ape-like creature easily 8 feet tall. Its body was covered in thick matted fur, a dark brown that seemed to absorb the light around it. But it was the face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. A twisted, almost human visage with deep-set eyes that burned with an otherworldly intelligence and rage. Time seemed to slow as I took in every horrifying detail. Its massive hands ended in razor-sharp claws that could easily tear a man apart. Muscles rippled beneath its fur as it moved with a speed that defied its size. I stood there paralyzed with fear as the creature lunged towards me. Its hot, rancid breath washed over me, a stench of decay and raw meat that made my stomach heave. Those massive hands reached for me, and I could see my death reflected in its feral eyes. At the last possible second, survival instinct kicked in. I threw myself to the side, feeling the rush of air as the Bigfoot's claws barely missed me. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me, but adrenaline kept me moving. I scrambled backward on all fours, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The creature turned, its movements unnaturally fluid for something so large. It let out a howl that shook me to my very core, a sound that was part animal rage, part something else, something that didn't belong in this world. "Help!" I screamed, my voice cracking with terror. "Somebody help me!" But I knew it was useless. We were miles from civilization, and my friends back at the camp would never reach me in time. I was alone with this impossible monster. The Bigfoot advanced on me, each step shaking the ground. I kept backing away, my hands scrabbling in the dirt for anything I could use as a weapon. My fingers closed around a thick branch, and I swung it wildly in front of me. "Stay back," I yelled, my voice trembling. "Don't come any closer." The creature paused, tilting its head as if considering me. For a brief, insane moment, I thought maybe it could understand me, but then it let out another bone-chilling roar and charged. I rolled to the side, feeling the whoosh of air as it barreled past me. I used the momentum to get to my feet and ran. I ran like I had never run before, crashing through the underbrush with no regard for direction or stealth. All that mattered was putting distance between myself and that thing. Branches whipped at my face, leaving stinging cuts. Roots seemed to reach up to trip me, but the sound of pursuit behind me kept me going, pushing through the pain and exhaustion. I don't know how long I ran. It could have been minutes or hours. Time lost all meaning in that nightmarish chase. But eventually I burst into a small clearing and realized I couldn't hear the creature anymore. I collapsed to my knees, gasping for air, my whole body shaking. As the adrenaline began to fade, the full weight of what had just happened hit me. I had come face to face with something that shouldn't exist, something that defied everything I thought I knew about the world. Tears mixed with the blood and dirt on my face as I sobbed, the stress and fear finally overwhelming me. I wanted to curl up right there and wait for it all to be over. But a distant howl reminded me that I wasn't safe yet. With trembling legs, I forced myself to stand. I had to find my way back to camp, had to warn the others. We needed to get out of this forest, away from that monster. As I stumbled through the woods trying to orient myself, one thought kept repeating in my mind. Would anyone believe me? The encounter had been so incredible, so beyond the realm of possibility, that I could scarcely believe it myself. And yet, I knew with absolute certainty that what I had seen was real. The sun was high in the sky now, but the forest seemed darker than ever. Every shadow held potential danger, every sound a possible threat. I pushed on, driven by the need to find my friends and escape this nightmare. Little did I know my ordeal was far from over. My lungs burned as I tore through the forest, adrenaline coursing through my veins like liquid fire. The encounter with the Bigfoot had shattered any remaining doubts I had about its existence, leaving only raw, primal fear in its wake. And now, that impossible creature was in pursuit. I could hear it crashing through the undergrowth behind me, impossibly fast for something so large. Each thunderous footfall sent tremors through the ground, spurring me to push harder, to run faster than I ever had before. Branches whipped at my face as I plunged through the dense foliage, leaving stinging cuts across my cheeks and forehead. Blood trickled into my eyes, blurring my vision, but I didn't dare slow down to wipe it away. Every second counted. "Help!" I screamed, though I knew it was futile. We were miles from any human settlement, and my friends at the camp were too far to hear. "Somebody, please." My cries were drowned out by a bone-chilling roar from behind me. It was closer now, much closer. I could hear the Bigfoot's heavy, ragged breathing, punctuated by the sharp crack of trees being pushed aside, as if they were mere twigs. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. Through the gaps in the trees, I caught glimpses of matted fur, powerful limbs, and those terrifyingly intelligent eyes fixed squarely on me. The creature moved with a fluid grace that defied its massive size, effortlessly navigating obstacles that slowed me down. "This isn't happening," I gasped between ragged breaths. "This can't be real." But the burning in my legs and the ache in my chest were all too real. I had been running for what felt like hours, though it could have been only minutes. Time lost all meaning in this nightmarish chase. I stumbled over a protruding root, nearly losing my balance. The momentary slowdown allowed me to hear the creature's breathing even more clearly. It was right behind me now, so close I could almost feel its presence bearing down on me. Panic gave me a fresh burst of speed. I knew that to stop, even for a moment, meant certain death. The image of the mangled bear carcass we had found earlier flashed through my mind, driving home the stakes of this desperate flight. My legs felt like lead, muscles screaming in protest with each step. But giving up wasn't an option. I focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on finding a path through the dense forest that might slow down my pursuer. Suddenly, the trees began to thin. I burst into a small clearing, the sudden openness momentarily disorienting after the claustrophobic density of the forest. For a brief, hopeful second, I thought I might have lost the creature. That hope was shattered by an enraged roar that seemed to shake the very air around me. It was close, too close. I spun around, searching frantically for any sign of the Bigfoot. The clearing offered no shelter, no place to hide. I was exposed, vulnerable. My legs trembled with exhaustion, threatening to give out at any moment. But the sound of snapping branches at the edge of the clearing spurred me back into motion. As I prepared to plunge back into the forest on the other side of the clearing, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Off to my right, partially obscured by a large boulder, was the dark mouth of a cave. In that split second, I had to make a choice: continue running through the open forest, where the Bigfoot's superior speed would inevitably allow it to catch me, or take a chance on the cave, which might offer shelter or a hiding place but could also trap me. The decision was made for me as the creature burst into the clearing with a roar that seemed to split the sky. Its massive form blocked out the sun, casting a shadow that stretched across the ground towards me like grasping fingers. I bolted for the cave entrance, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Behind me, I could hear the heavy footfalls of the Bigfoot as it gave chase, closing the distance with terrifying speed. "Please," I gasped, though I wasn't sure who or what I was pleading to. "Please let me make it." I dove into the cave entrance, feeling the rush of air as the creature's massive hand swiped at me, missing by mere inches. I tumbled down a short incline, rocks scraping against my arms and legs as I rolled. When I came to a stop, I found myself in near total darkness. The only light came from the cave entrance, now partially blocked by the looming silhouette of the Bigfoot. It roared in frustration, the sound amplified by the cave walls until it felt like my eardrums might rupture. I scrambled backward, deeper into the cave. My hand brushed against something smooth and cylindrical, my flashlight, which must have fallen from my pocket during the tumble. With shaking hands, I switched it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. The light revealed a narrow passage leading deeper into the cave system. Without hesitation, I began to crawl through it. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of the Bigfoot trying to force its way into the cave entrance. Rocks crumbled and shifted as it clawed at the opening, but its massive size worked against it. As I wiggled through the tight passage, I allowed myself a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I had found a way to escape this nightmare. But even as that thought formed, I heard a sound that turned my blood to ice. The unmistakable noise of the creature finding another way into the cave system. Its roars echoed through the twisting tunnels, seeming to come from everywhere at once. I pushed on, ignoring the scrapes and bruises from the rough stone, driven by pure survival instinct. The chase wasn't over. It had merely changed venues. As I crawled deeper into the earth, away from the sunlight and deeper into unknown darkness, I realized that this could very well be where my story ended. But I wasn't going to give up. Not yet. Not while I still had breath in my body and the will to live. The tunnels ahead branched and twisted, offering choices I had no way to evaluate. With the sounds of pursuit growing ever closer, I made my decisions on instinct alone, praying that each turn wouldn't lead me to a dead end. As I squeezed through a particularly tight passage, I couldn't help but wonder, was I escaping, or was I being herded? The thought sent a new wave of terror through me as I pushed deeper into the earth, the monster's roars echoing in my ears, driving me forward into the unknown. The narrow passages of the cave system seemed endless, twisting and turning in a dizzying labyrinth. My lungs burned with each ragged breath, and my muscles screamed in protest as I pushed myself forward. The beam of my flashlight danced wildly across the rough stone walls, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to reach for me with grasping fingers. Behind me, the sounds of pursuit echoed through the tunnels. The Bigfoot's roars reverberated off the walls, making it impossible to tell how close it truly was. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: it was getting closer. I emerged into a slightly larger cavern, my flashlight revealing multiple tunnel entrances. For a split second, I hesitated, trying to decide which way to go. That moment of indecision cost me dearly. Without warning, a massive, hairy arm swung out of the darkness. I had no time to react before it connected with my chest, sending me flying through the air. The impact knocked the breath from my lungs and sent my flashlight skittering across the cavern floor. I slammed into the trunk of a fallen tree that had somehow found its way into the cave system. Pain exploded through my body, and I heard something crack. A rib, maybe two. Stars danced in my vision as I struggled to breathe, to move, to do anything. "No," I wheezed, trying to force my battered body to respond. "Get up, get up." But before I could gather my wits, the creature was upon me. In the dim light cast by my fallen flashlight, I caught glimpses of matted fur, glinting eyes, and wickedly sharp claws. Those claws raked across my back, shredding my jacket and the flesh beneath with terrifying ease. I screamed in agony, the sound echoing off the cave walls. The pain was unlike anything I had ever experienced, white-hot and all-consuming. I could feel warm blood soaking through what remained of my clothing. "Help!" I cried out, though I knew it was futile. There was no one to hear me, no one to come to my rescue. I was alone with this monster, miles from any hope of salvation. The Bigfoot's foul breath filled my nostrils, a stomach-turning mixture of rotting meat and something far worse. Its enormous hands wrapped around my throat, slowly squeezing the life out of me. I clawed at its fingers, trying desperately to pry them loose, but it was like trying to bend steel. "Please," I gasped, my voice barely a whisper. "Don't." But there was no mercy in those inhuman eyes, no hint of compassion or understanding. This was a predator, and I was its prey. Nothing more. My vision began to fade as I struggled against the monster's impossible strength. Black spots danced at the edges of my sight, growing larger with each passing second. My lungs burned, screaming for air that couldn't reach them. In that moment, I was certain that death was only moments away. Fragments of my life flashed before my eyes. My family, my friends, all the things I'd never get to do or say. A profound sadness washed over me, followed quickly by a surge of anger. I didn't want to die, not here, not like this. With the last of my strength, I fumbled at my belt, searching for something, anything that might save me. My fingers closed around the handle of my hunting knife. I had forgotten it was there, a final, desperate chance at survival. In one fluid motion, I drew the knife and plunged it into the Bigfoot's arm. The blade sank deep into its flesh, and a howl of pain and rage filled the cavern. The sound was deafening, like nothing I had ever heard before. Part animal, part something else entirely. The creature's grip on my throat loosened, and I gasped in a lungful of sweet, life-giving air. Without thinking, I yanked the knife free and stabbed again, aiming for any part of the monster I could reach. The Bigfoot reeled back, releasing me entirely. I fell to the ground, coughing and retching as my body fought to recover from the near strangulation. Every breath sent waves of pain through my chest, but I forced myself to move. I scrambled away on all fours, searching frantically for my flashlight. Behind me, I could hear the creature thrashing about, its roars of pain and anger echoing off the cave walls. My hand closed around the flashlight, and I switched it on, sweeping the beam around the cavern. There, across the open space, was another tunnel entrance. It was narrow, possibly too small for the Bigfoot to follow. With no time to consider other options, I made a run for it. Pain lanced through my body with every step, but adrenaline and sheer terror propelled me forward. I could hear the monster recovering, its heavy footsteps shaking the ground as it gave chase once more. I dove into the tunnel entrance just as a massive hand swiped at me, feeling the rush of air as it barely missed. The passage was tight, forcing me to crawl on my hands and knees. Behind me, I could hear the Bigfoot roaring in frustration, unable to follow. I pushed myself forward, ignoring the pain, the exhaustion, the fear. I had no idea where this tunnel led, but anywhere was better than being trapped with that creature. As I crawled, I felt warm blood trickling down my back from the claw wounds. My throat felt raw and bruised, each breath a struggle. "Keep moving," I whispered to myself, my voice hoarse and barely recognizable. "Don't stop. Don't look back." The sounds of the Bigfoot's rage began to fade as I put more distance between us. But I didn't slow down. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over, that the monster would find another way to reach me. As I pushed deeper into the unknown darkness of the cave system, one thought kept repeating in my mind. I had to find a way out. I had to survive this nightmare and warn others about what lurked in these woods. Because if I didn't make it out alive, who would believe that such a creature existed, With determination born of desperation, I pressed on, hoping against hope that each turn of the tunnel would lead me closer to safety, to sunlight, to a world where monsters like this didn't exist. But deep down, I knew the truth. My ordeal was far from over, and the real fight for survival had only just begun. My legs felt like lead, each step a monumental effort as I stumbled through the dense underbrush. The forest, once a place of adventure and excitement, had transformed into a nightmarish landscape of shadows and unseen dangers. My body was a canvas of pain. Cuts stung, bruises throbbed, and the deep claw marks on my back burned with every movement. "Keep going," I wheezed, my voice barely a whisper. "Don't stop. Can't stop." Blood trickled down my face from a gash on my forehead, blurring my vision. I wiped it away with a trembling hand, leaving a smear of red across my sleeve. The sight of it brought the reality of my situation crashing down on me. I was hurt, badly, and lost in a wilderness that now harbored a monster straight out of legend. Behind me, carried on the wind, came a sound that chilled me to my very core. The enraged roar of the Bigfoot echoed through the trees, a primal scream of fury and pain. The knife wound I had inflicted had only served to anger it further, and now it was hunting me with renewed vigor. "Oh God," I gasped, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "Please, no more." But my prayers went unanswered. The roars grew closer, spurring me on despite the screaming protests of my battered body. Branches whipped at my face as I pushed through the foliage, leaving fresh cuts to join the constellation of injuries already marking my skin. I had no sense of direction, no idea where I was in relation to our camp or any form of civilization. All I knew was that I had to keep moving, had to put as much distance as possible between myself and that impossible creature. As I crested a small rise, I spotted something that sent a surge of hope through me. Just ahead, partially hidden by the undergrowth, was a rocky outcropping, and there, barely visible in the fading light, was a narrow crevice. Without hesitation, I made a beeline for the opening. It was tight, almost too tight, but desperation lent me strength I didn't know I possessed. I squeezed inside, feeling the rough stones scrape against my wounds as I forced my way deeper into the crevice. Just as I wedged myself as far back as I could go, I heard it, the heavy footfalls of the Bigfoot shaking the ground with each step. I held my breath, pressing myself against the cold stone, praying that the creature wouldn't find me. For a moment there was silence, then a low, rumbling growl filled the air. It was close, so close. I could smell its musky animal scent, mixed with the metallic tang of blood, mine or its own, I couldn't tell. Suddenly, massive hands clawed at the entrance to my hiding spot. I bit back a scream as I saw those wickedly sharp claws scraping against the stone, sending sparks flying. The Bigfoot's furious growls sent vibrations through the rock, and I could feel them in my very bones. "Please," I whispered, though I don't know who or what I was pleading to. "Please, just let it go away." But the creature was relentless. It pounded against the rock, roaring its frustration as it tried to reach me. I could see flashes of matted fur, glimpses of those terrifyingly intelligent eyes as it attempted to force its way into my sanctuary. Hours passed like an eternity as I huddled in the darkness. My body shook with exhaustion and fear, and the pain from my injuries seemed to grow with each passing minute. But still, I didn't dare move. The sound of the Bigfoot's frustrated attempts to reach me kept me frozen in place. As night fell, casting the forest into near total darkness, the attacks on my hiding place became less frequent. But I could still hear the creature out there, pacing, waiting. It was patient, far more patient than any animal I had ever encountered. In the quiet moments between its attempts to reach me, my mind raced. How had this happened? Just days ago I had been excited about this hunting trip, eager to spend time in the wilderness with my friends. Now, those same friends were God knows where, and I was trapped in a nightmare that defied all logic and reason. "They'll come looking," I murmured to myself, needing to hear a human voice, even if it was my own. "They'll find me. They have to." But as the hours dragged on, That hope began to fade. The reality of my situation sank in. I was alone, injured, and being hunted by a creature that shouldn't exist. Even if my friends were searching for me, how would they ever find me here? The night wore on, a symphony of forest sounds punctuated by the occasional roar or growl from my pursuer. I drifted in and out of consciousness, exhaustion and blood loss taking their toll. Each time I jolted awake, my heart racing, certain that the Bigfoot had finally found a way to reach me. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I realized the sounds of the creature had faded. Cautiously, I peered out of my hiding spot. The forest seemed eerily calm, no sign of the monster that had pursued me so relentlessly. With agonizing slowness, I began to extract myself from the crevice. Every movement sent waves of pain through my body, and I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out. As I finally emerged, I took stock of my surroundings. The area around the rocky outcropping was a scene of destruction. Broken branches, gouges in the earth, and disturbingly patches of blood. Whether it was mine or the creature's, I couldn't tell. I knew I couldn't stay here. The Bigfoot might return at any moment, and I was in no condition to face it again. With trembling legs, I began to move, picking a direction at random. My only goal now was to find help, to reach civilization before my strength gave out completely. As I stumbled through the awakening forest, a new fear began to gnaw at me. Even if I survived this, even if I made it back to the world of men and machines, who would believe my story? The thought of trying to explain what had happened, of seeing the disbelief and concern in people's eyes, was almost as terrifying as the creature itself. But those were problems for later. Right now, I had to focus on survival, one step at a time, one breath at a time. I had escaped the immediate threat, but I knew deep in my bones that this ordeal was far from over. The forest held its secrets close, and I had glimpsed something that would haunt me for the rest of my days. With the rising sun at my back, I pressed on, each step a victory against the pain and exhaustion. Somewhere out there was safety, answers, and maybe, just maybe, a way to prove that what I had experienced was real. But first, I had to make it out of this forest alive. The first rays of dawn pierced through the forest canopy, casting long shadows across the ground. I blinked, my eyes struggling to adjust after hours in the darkness of my rocky refuge. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest as I cautiously emerged from the crevice, my movements slow and deliberate. "It's over," I whispered, my voice hoarse and barely recognizable. "You made it." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't true. The night's horrors might have passed, but their impact was etched into my very being. I took a stumbling step forward, nearly collapsing as pain shot through my leg. Looking down, I saw my pants were torn and caked with dried blood. The memories came flooding back, the chase, the attack, the desperate struggle for survival. "Focus," I muttered, gritting my teeth against the pain. "You have to get back, have to warn the others." As I surveyed my surroundings, my breath caught in my throat. The forest around me was a scene of utter destruction. Trees lay splintered and broken, their trunks snapped like twigs. Deep gouges marred the earth, and here and there, I could see massive footprints pressed into the soft soil. But it was the blood that truly chilled me to my core. Dark streaks painted the underbrush, some of it undoubtedly mine, but other patches were a strange, almost black color. The creature's blood, I realized with a shudder. It was real, I said, my voice shaking. All of it. It was real. Part of me had hoped, prayed even, that the events of the night had been some sort of fever dream, a hallucination brought on by fear and exhaustion. But the evidence before me was undeniable. I had come face to face with something that shouldn't exist, something that defied all rational explanation. With trembling hands, I checked my pockets, hoping against hope that I still had my phone. But it was gone, likely lost during the frantic chase through the woods. I was alone, injured, and completely cut off from the outside world. "Okay," I said, trying to steady my nerves. "Think. Which way is camp?" I squinted at the sun, trying to orient myself. After a moment's hesitation, I picked a direction and started walking. Each step was agony, my injuries protesting with every movement. But the thought of reuniting with my friends, of finding safety in numbers, drove me forward. As I stumbled through the forest, my mind reeled, trying to process the horrors I had survived. The image of the Bigfoot, its massive form, those intelligent, rage-filled eyes, was seared into my memory. How could such a creature exist? And if it did, how had it remained hidden for so long? They'll never believe me, I realized aloud. The thought sent a wave of despair washing over me. Even if I made it back, even if I survived this ordeal, who would accept my story? I'd be labeled a madman, a victim of trauma-induced delusions. I don't know how long I walked. Time seemed to lose all meaning as I pushed myself forward, driven by the primal need to find safety. The forest around me was eerily quiet, as if all other life had fled in the wake of last night's events. Just as I felt my strength beginning to fail, when the pain and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, I heard something that made my heart leap. Voices. Human voices calling out in the distance. Hello? I tried to shout, but it came out as little more than a croak. I cleared my throat and tried again. Hello, I'm here. The voices grew closer, and I recognized them. Jake and Sarah, my hunting companions. Relief washed over me in a dizzying wave. Michael? Jake's voice rang out. Michael, is that you? Here, I called back, stumbling towards the sound. I'm over here. They appeared through the trees, their faces etched with concern and relief. As soon as they saw me, their eyes widened in shock. Oh my God, Sarah gasped. Michael, what happened to you? I opened my mouth to explain, but the words wouldn't come. How could I possibly describe what I had been through? Instead, I felt my legs give way beneath me as the last of my strength deserted me. Jake rushed forward, catching me before I hit the ground. I've got you, buddy, he said, his voice tight with worry. We've been searching all night. What the hell happened out there? As I sagged in Jake's arms, the full weight of my ordeal crashed down upon me. Tears streamed down my face, mixing with the dirt and blood. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, I managed to choke out. Sarah knelt beside us, her hand gently touching my shoulder. Michael, you're hurt badly. We need to get you to a hospital. The word hospital sent a jolt of fear through me. How could I explain my injuries to doctors, to the authorities? The creature had left no concrete evidence, no fur, no clear footprints that couldn't be explained away. It would be my word against rationality itself. No, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. No hospital. Not yet. I need to show you something first. Jake and Sarah exchanged worried glances. Michael, Jake began, whatever happened, it can wait. You need medical attention. I shook my head vehemently, instantly regretting it as pain lanced through my skull. You don't understand. It's still out there. We're all in danger. I have to show you. Have to make you believe. My words trailed off as a wave of dizziness washed over me. The world began to spin, and I felt myself slipping into unconsciousness. The last thing I heard before darkness claimed me was Sarah's voice, tight with fear and concern. Jake, call for help. Now. As I drifted into oblivion, a single thought echoed through my mind. This wasn't over. The nightmare was far from finished. And somehow, some way, I had to make them understand the truth of what lurked in these woods. Because if I didn't, if I couldn't convince them, then none of us were safe. The sterile hospital room felt suffocating as I lay there, my body a patchwork of bandages and pain. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a constant reminder of how far removed I was from the dark, primal terror of the forest. But the memory of what I'd encountered still burned vividly in my mind, no matter how much the world around me tried to deny its existence. 2 police officers stood at the foot of my bed, their expressions a mixture of skepticism and poorly concealed impatience. Beside them, a grizzled forest ranger shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Mr. Thompson, the taller officer began, his tone carefully neutral. Can you please walk us through the events one more time? I took a deep breath, wincing as my cracked ribs protested. I've told you already. It was Bigfoot, a massive ape-like creature. It chased me through the woods, attacked me. I barely escaped with my life. The officers exchanged glances, and I could practically hear their unspoken thoughts. The ranger cleared his throat. Son, I've been working these woods for over 3 decades. There's no such thing as Bigfoot. I know what I saw, I insisted, my voice rising despite the pain. It was huge, at least 8 feet tall, covered in thick, matted fur. Its eyes were almost human, but filled with such rage. My words trailed off as I saw Jake and Sarah enter the room. My hunting companions, my friends. Surely they would back me up, would believe me. But the worried looks they exchanged crushed that hope instantly. Michael, Sarah said gently, approaching the bed. We're so relieved you're okay. But, are you absolutely certain about what you saw? You were out there alone for hours. The mind can play tricks in stressful situations. No, I shouted, immediately regretting it as pain lanced through my body. No tricks. It was real. You have to believe me. We're all in danger as long as that thing is out there. Jake stepped forward, his face etched with concern. Buddy, you've been through a lot. Maybe you hit your head or... I didn't hit my head, I snapped. Why won't anyone listen to me? The police officer cleared his throat. Mr. Thompson, we've thoroughly searched the area where you were found. There's no evidence of any large animal activity, let alone, well, what you're describing. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. Of course, there was no evidence. The creature was too intelligent, too careful to leave any traces behind. But how could I make them understand that? As if reading my thoughts, the ranger spoke up. The local news is running a story on your incident. They're painting it as a cautionary tale about the dangers of inexperienced hunters getting lost in the woods. My jaw clenched in frustration. I'm not inexperienced. I've been hunting these woods for years. I know what I saw. But my protests fell on deaf ears. Over the next few hours, a parade of disbelievers filed through my hospital room. Doctors suggested I might be suffering from a concussion or post-traumatic stress. A psychiatrist was called in, asking probing questions about my mental state and family history. Even my own family, when they arrived, couldn't hide their skepticism. My mother's eyes were red from crying, but I could see the doubt in them as I recounted my story once again. Honey, she said, her voice trembling. Maybe you just imagined it? You were alone out there for so long, you must have been so scared. Tears of frustration streamed down my face. Mom, please, you have to believe me. I'm not crazy. I'm not making this up. But I could see it in her eyes, in the way my father squeezed her hand. They thought I had lost my mind out there in the woods. As night fell, I watched from my window as search parties returned from the forest. Their faces were grim, tired, but showed no sign of having encountered anything out of the ordinary. No trace of the monster that had nearly killed me. A nurse entered, checking my vitals and adjusting my IV. You should try to get some rest, Mr. Thompson. It's been a long day. I nodded numbly, but sleep was the furthest thing from my mind. As the room emptied and the lights dimmed, I was left alone with my thoughts and the lingering terror of my encounter. The local news played softly on the TV in the corner of the room. I watched in disbelief as they painted me as some foolish, inexperienced hunter who had gotten lost and injured himself in the woods. They interviewed experts who explained away my story as hallucinations brought on by fear and exposure. This is a stark reminder of the importance of proper preparation and respect for nature, a smug-looking wildlife official declared. Mr. Thompson is lucky to be alive after his reckless behavior. I wanted to scream, to throw something at the TV, but what good would it do? No one believed me. No one wanted to believe me. It was easier for them to write me off as a fool or a lunatic than to face the terrifying reality of what lurked in those woods. As the night wore on, I drifted in and out of a fitful sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those intelligent, rage-filled eyes staring back at me. I could smell its musky animal scent, feel its hot breath on my face. In the early hours of the morning, I made a decision. If no one would believe me, if no one would take the threat seriously, then it was up to me. I had to find proof, had to make them understand the danger that lurked in those woods. With shaking hands, I reached for the notepad and pen on the bedside table. I began to write, documenting every detail of my encounter. The creature's appearance, its movements, the sounds it made. I drew crude sketches, trying to capture the terror of those moments. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the window, I looked down at the pages filled with my frantic scrawl. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Somehow, some way, I would find a way to prove that what I had seen was real. I knew the road ahead would be difficult. The world had already decided I was either a liar or a madman, but I couldn't let it go. Not when I knew the truth. Not when I knew that somewhere out there, in the dark depths of the forest, a monster was waiting. As I heard the hospital beginning to stir with the morning shift change, I made a silent vow. I would recover, I would gather evidence, and I would make them believe. Because if I didn't, if I couldn't convince them of the danger, then it was only a matter of time before someone else encountered that creature. And next time, they might not be as lucky as I was. The nightmare wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But this time, I would be prepared. This time, I would find a way to expose the truth no matter the cost. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that somewhere out there in the forest, the Bigfoot was waiting, watching, biding its time until our paths would inevitably cross again. The crisp autumn air nipped at my skin as I stood at the edge of the forest, my hands trembling despite the warm cup of coffee I clutched. The trees loomed before me, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, beckoning me back into their shadowy depths. But I wouldn't go. I couldn't go. Not after what had happened. It had been weeks since my encounter with the creature, with Bigfoot. But the memories were as fresh and raw as the slowly healing wounds that crisscrossed my body. I absently traced a finger along one of the bandages on my arm, feeling the raised scar tissue beneath. Physical reminders of a nightmare that no one else believed. "You okay, Michael?" Sarah's voice startled me from my reverie. I turned to see her approaching, concern etched on her face. "You've been standing here for almost an hour." I forced a smile, but it felt hollow. "Yeah, just thinking." She nodded, her eyes flicking to the tree line and back to me. "You know you don't have to do this, right? No one expects you to come back here after what happened." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "You mean after I got lost and hurt myself in a panic? Isn't that the official story?" Sarah's expression softened. "Michael, But her words were cut off by a sudden rustling in the underbrush. My heart leapt into my throat, adrenaline surging through my veins as I stumbled backward. Sarah caught my arm, steadying me. "It's just a deer," she said softly as the animal bounded away. "See? Nothing to be afraid of." But there was everything to be afraid of. Every sound, every shadow held the potential for terror, because I knew what was out there, even if no one else did. "I should go," I muttered, turning away from the forest. "I don't know why I came here." As I walked back to my car, I could feel Sarah's worried gaze on my back. I knew she meant well, but her concern only deepened my isolation. How could I explain the constant fear that gnawed at me, the way every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sent my heart racing, knowing that the creature was still out there waiting? That night, like every night since the attack, my dreams were haunted by glowing eyes and matted fur. I thrashed in my sheets, reliving the terror of that endless chase through the darkened woods. The Bigfoot's roar echoed in my ears, so real that I jolted awake with a strangled cry, drenched in cold sweat. Gasping for breath, I fumbled for the light switch. The soft glow of the lamp did little to dispel the lingering shadows of my nightmare. I reached for my phone, my trembling fingers bringing up the folder of images I had collected over the past weeks. Blurry photos, shaky video footage, eyewitness accounts. I had scoured the internet for any shred of evidence that might validate my experience. Most were easily dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications, but a few held just enough detail to keep that spark of hope alive. I zoomed in on one particular image, a grainy still from a trail camera that showed a dark, hulking shape moving between the trees. It could have been anything, a bear, a trick of the light. But I knew with a bone-deep certainty that I was looking at the same creature that had nearly ended my life. "You're real," I whispered to the image, "and I'll prove it." The next morning found me back at the forest's edge. I don't know what compelled me to return, what masochistic urge drove me to face my fears, but as I stood there staring into the depths of the woods, I felt a strange mix of terror and determination. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This would be the last time, I promised myself. One final look before I put this chapter of my life behind me for good. As I turned to leave, a sound froze me in my tracks. It was distant, barely audible over the rustle of leaves, but unmistakable. A howl, low, guttural, and utterly inhuman. It echoed through the trees, raising goosebumps along my arms and sending ice through my veins. For a moment I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, with a surge of panic, I sprinted back to my car. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I peeled out of the parking lot, tires squealing on the asphalt, that howl still rang in my ears. It was a chilling reminder that some monsters are all too real, no matter how much the world tries to deny their existence. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white. The forest receded in my rearview mirror, but I knew the memories, and the fear, would stay with me. Because somewhere in those dark woods, a creature beyond imagination roamed. And even if no one else believed me, I knew the truth. The encounter had changed me, marked me in ways both visible and invisible. As I drove away from the forest for what I hoped was the last time, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't truly over. The Bigfoot was out there, and somehow I knew our paths would cross again. But next time I vowed I would be ready. Next time I would have proof. And maybe then, finally, the world would believe. I gazed up at the familiar cabin, the soft glow of the porch light welcoming me home after another long, exhausting week in the city. As I pulled my car up the winding dirt driveway, a sense of relief washed over me. This place, my private sanctuary nestled deep in the heart of the dense forest, had always been my haven, a place to escape the chaos and stresses of everyday life. With a contented sigh, I grabbed my overnight bag and made my way to the cabin's front door. The familiar creak of the wooden planks beneath my feet brought a smile to my face. So many happy memories had been made within these walls, from cozy evenings curled up by the fireplace to exhilarating hikes through the surrounding wilderness. This was my safe place, the one place where I could truly relax and unwind. As I stepped inside, the comforting scent of pine and old books enveloped me. I took a moment to look around, taking in the familiar sights. The well-worn leather armchair, the bookshelves lining the walls, the inviting fireplace. Dropping my bag on the wooden floor, I made my way to the kitchen, eager to pour myself a glass of wine and settle in for a peaceful evening. The floorboards creaked ominously underfoot as I moved about the cabin, and I couldn't help but glance out the windows, peering into the inky blackness of the forest beyond. The thick, towering trees seemed to loom over the cabin, and I suddenly felt a prickle of unease creep up the back of my neck. It was as if the forest was watching me, waiting. Shaking off the uneasy feeling, I poured myself a generous glass of red wine and made my way to the living room, sinking into the familiar cushions of my favorite chair. The crackling of the fireplace and the soft glow of the flames did little to ease the growing sense of unease that had settled over me. I tried to focus on the book I had brought with me, but my eyes kept drifting to the windows, scanning the inky blackness beyond. As the hours ticked by, I found myself growing increasingly drowsy, the whine and the rhythmic sound of the fire lulling me into a peaceful slumber. I don't know how long I was out, but the sudden thud against the cabin door jolted me awake, my heart pounding in my chest. Scrambling to my feet, I grabbed the flashlight I kept by the door and cautiously approached the entrance, my hand trembling as I reached for the deadbolt. Pausing for a moment, I steeled my nerves and peered out the window, shining the beam of the flashlight into the darkness. At first, I saw nothing but the inky blackness of the forest, the towering trees casting long, ominous shadows across the ground. But then movement, a hulking figure in the distance disappearing behind the trees. My breath caught in my throat as I stared, transfixed, wondering if my eyes were playing tricks on me. Shaking my head, I brushed it off as a stray animal or perhaps a trick of the light. Surely there was no way that what I had seen could be real. Bigfoot wasn't real, it was just a myth, a story told around campfires to scare children. Yet, the uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach refused to go away. The plate slipped from my hands, crashing to the floor in a deafening shatter. I froze, my heart pounding as the sound echoed through the cabin. For a moment, the only noise was the faint crackling of the fire, but then a loud thud from the living room shattered the eerie silence. My breath caught in my throat as I gripped the kitchen counter, trying to steady my trembling hands. Summoning what little courage I had left, I slowly made my way towards the living room, the beam of my flashlight casting an unsteady glow across the room. That's when I saw them. Large, shaggy footprints leading to the shattered window, the broken glass sparkling on the wooden floor. A chill ran down my spine as I realized someone, or something, had broken in. Panic surged through me as I raced to the front door, fumbling with the deadbolt. My heart sank as I pulled it open, revealing the splintered wood frame. Someone, or something, had forced their way in. Clutching the flashlight tightly, I peered out into the inky blackness of the forest, my mind racing with fear and dread. Suddenly, a massive, hulking figure emerged from the shadows, its glowing red eyes fixed on me. A bone-chilling roar erupted from its gaping jaws, sending a shiver down my spine. I stumbled backwards, my legs shaking as the towering creature advanced, its matted fur and sharp claws making it a truly terrifying sight. In a desperate attempt to defend myself, I scrambled towards the kitchen, grabbing the largest knife I could find. My hands trembled as I gripped the handle, my knuckles turning white. I turned to face the creature, which was now lumbering closer, its saliva dripping from its jaws as it let out another thunderous roar. "What? What are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible as I stared up at the massive, hairy beast. The creature let out a guttural growl, its eyes narrowing as it fixed its gaze on me. Suddenly, it lunged forward, its powerful claws swiping at me. I barely managed to dodge the attack, the knife clutched tightly in my hands. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice shaking with fear. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will if I have to." The creature paused, its head tilting to the side as if it were considering my words. For a moment I dared to hope that it might be intelligent, that it might understand my plea. But then it let out another bone-chilling roar, and I knew that this was no ordinary animal. This was a monster, a creature of pure savagery and destruction, and it was intent on tearing me apart. I braced myself, the knife trembling in my hands as the creature advanced. It was now or never. I had to fight for my life. The creature lunged forward again, its massive jaws snapping at me. I swung the knife, slashing at its face, and the creature let out a pained howl. But it wasn't enough to stop it. It swiped at me with its claws, knocking the knife from my hand and sending me crashing to the floor. I cried out in pain as my back hit the hard wood, the air knocked from my lungs. The creature loomed over me, its hot, foul breath washing over my face as it let out another thunderous roar. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself for the inevitable, but the killing blow never came. Instead, the creature let out a snort, its red eyes narrowing as it studied me. For a moment, I dared to hope that it might spare my life. But then it opened its jaws, and I knew that my fate was sealed. The creature's teeth clamped down on my leg, and I let out a bone-chilling scream of agony as its sharp fangs tore into my flesh. The pain was overwhelming, and I felt myself slipping into darkness. But I couldn't give up. Not yet. With what little strength I had left, I clawed at the creature's face, desperately trying to break free from its grip. The creature growled, its jaws tightening around my leg, but I refused to give in. I had to escape, to get help, to tell someone what had happened. With a final desperate surge of energy, I managed to pull myself free, my leg throbbing with pain as I scrambled towards the front door. I could hear the creature's heavy footsteps thundering behind me, its guttural roars echoing through the cabin. I had to get out of here to reach safety. But as I glanced back, I saw the creature pausing in the doorway, its glowing red eyes fixed on me. It let out a low, rumbling growl, its massive frame blocking my only means of escape. I was trapped, injured, and alone, with no one to hear my cries for help. The creature had made its lair in my sanctuary, and I knew that I might not survive this ordeal. As I huddled in the corner, my leg aching and my heart pounding, I couldn't help but wonder if anyone would ever believe my story. Would they think I was crazy, or would they recognize the true horror of what I had faced? Only time would tell, but in that moment, all I could focus on was survival. I had to find a way out of this nightmare, no matter the cost. The creature's massive form filled the doorway, its red eyes gleaming with a predatory intensity that sent chills down my spine. I pressed myself against the wall, my injured leg throbbing with each heartbeat. The knife lay just out of reach, mocking me with its uselessness. "Please," I whimpered, knowing it was futile. "Just leave me alone." The beast responded with a guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. It took a lumbering step forward, saliva dripping from its yellowed fangs. The stench of wet fur and something far more foul, rotting meat perhaps, filled my nostrils. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the searing pain in my leg. Fight or flight instinct took over, and flight was my only option. I lunged for the kitchen, hoping to find another weapon or maybe an escape route I hadn't considered before. The creature's massive paw swiped at me, its claws raking across my back. I screamed in agony as I felt my skin tear, warm blood soaking through my shirt. The force of the blow sent me crashing into the kitchen table, scattering chairs across the floor. "Help!" I cried out, knowing full well no one could hear me in this isolated cabin. "Somebody, please!" The beast roared in response, a sound so primal and terrifying that I felt it in the pit of my stomach. It charged at me, surprisingly fast for its size. I rolled under the table, buying myself a precious few seconds. My eyes darted around frantically, searching for anything I could use to defend myself. They landed on a heavy cast-iron skillet hanging from a rack. I lunged for it, my fingers wrapping around the handle just as the creature flipped the table aside like it was made of cardboard. I swung the skillet with all my might, connecting solidly with the side of the beast's head. It let out a yelp of pain and stumbled backward, shaking its massive head. For a moment, hope flared in my chest. Maybe I could fight this thing off after all. But that hope was quickly extinguished as the creature's eyes refocused on me, now blazing with fury. It charged again, faster than before. I swung the skillet once more, but this time the beast was ready. It caught my arm in its powerful jaws, crunching down with incredible force. I screamed as I felt bones snap. The skillet clattered to the floor, and I was left defenseless once again. The creature lifted me off the ground, shaking me like a rag doll. Pain exploded through my entire body, and I thought for sure this was the end. Then, inexplicably, it released me. I crumpled to the floor, cradling my mangled arm against my chest. Through tear-filled eyes, I looked up at the towering beast. It stood over me, panting heavily, its breath hot and rancid on my face. "What do you want from me?" I sobbed, my voice barely above a whisper. The creature tilted its head, almost as if it were considering my question. For a brief, insane moment, I wondered if it might actually respond. But then it let out another ear-splitting roar, spraying me with saliva and bits of something I didn't want to identify. I closed my eyes, waiting for the killing blow. But it didn't come. Instead, I heard the sound of breaking glass and splintering wood. When I opened my eyes, the creature was gone, having smashed through the kitchen window. Adrenaline still coursing through my veins, I forced myself to my feet. Every movement was agony, but I knew I couldn't stay here. The beast could return at any moment. I stumbled towards the front door, leaving a trail of blood in my wake. My vision swam, and I fought to stay conscious. Just as I reached the threshold, I heard it again, the sound of heavy footsteps and labored breathing. No, 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 I muttered, willing my battered body to move faster. I made it outside, the cool night air a shock to my system. The forest loomed before me, dark and foreboding. But I had no choice. I had to get away. I half ran, half limped into the woods, branches whipping at my face as I pushed through the underbrush. Behind me, I could hear the creature crashing through the trees, gaining ground with every second. My foot caught on a root and I went down hard, crying out as my injuries flared with fresh pain. I tried to get up, but my body wouldn't respond. This was it. This was how I was going to die. The creature's shadow fell over me and I braced myself for the end. But once again it hesitated. I turned my head slowly, looking up at the massive beast. Its red eyes bore into mine, and for a moment, I saw something there. Not intelligence exactly, but awareness. This wasn't just some animal acting on instinct. There was purpose behind its actions, as terrifying as that thought was. It leaned down, sniffing at me curiously. Then, to my utter disbelief, it let out a snort and slowly backed away. I watched, stunned, as it turned and lumbered off into the darkness of the forest. For several minutes I lay there, afraid to move, afraid to even breathe. But as the silence of the night settled back in, I realized it was truly gone. At least for now. With tremendous effort, I pulled myself up, using a nearby tree for support. My entire body screamed in protest, but I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to get help, had to tell someone what happened. As I limped back towards the road, my mind raced. Would anyone believe me? The creature had disappeared without a trace, leaving me with nothing but my injuries and a story that sounded too fantastical to be true. But I knew what I had seen, what I had experienced. This was no bear, no ordinary predator. This was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist in our world. I reached my car, fumbling with the keys as I tried to unlock the door with my good hand. As I slid into the driver's seat, wincing at the pain, I caught a glimpse of movement in my rearview mirror. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I saw those glowing red eyes watching me from the tree line. But when I blinked, they were gone. Maybe they had never been there at all. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me after the trauma I'd endured. I started the engine, my hands shaking as I put the car in gear. As I drove away from the cabin, away from the horrors I'd experienced, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that somehow, some way, I would encounter that creature again, and next time, I might not be so lucky. The lights of the nearest town appeared on the horizon, and I felt a small measure of relief. Soon I would be among people again. Soon I could get help for my injuries and report what had happened. But as I drove, a new fear began to take hold. Would anyone believe me? Or would they dismiss my story as the ravings of a traumatized, possibly delusional victim? I gripped the steering wheel tighter, ignoring the pain in my arm. It didn't matter if they believed me or not. I knew the truth. And I would never, ever, feel safe in those woods again. As the first buildings of the town came into view, I made a silent vow to myself. I would heal, I would recover, and then I would find answers. Because if that creature was out there, others needed to know. They needed to be warned. The hunt for Bigfoot was no longer a myth or a hobby for enthusiasts. The cool night air hit my face as I dragged myself out of the cabin, every nerve in my body screaming in agony. My injured leg throbbed with each movement, leaving a trail of blood behind me. I couldn't believe I had managed to escape the monster's clutches, but I knew I wasn't safe yet. Far from it. I forced myself to look back, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. There it was, the creature. Bigfoot, my mind unhelpfully supplied. pausing in the doorway. Its massive form filled the entire frame. Those glowing red eyes locked onto me. I could see the moonlight reflecting off its matted fur, still damp with my blood. "Please," I whispered, though I knew it was futile. "Just let me go." The creature tilted its head almost as if it understood, but then it let out a bone-chilling roar that shattered the night's silence, and I knew my plea had fallen on deaf ears. I turned away and started to stumble through the dense underbrush, my good leg trembling with the effort of supporting my weight. Branches whipped at my face and arms, leaving stinging cuts, but I couldn't slow down. Behind me, I could hear the creature crashing through the forest, its heavy footfalls getting closer with each passing second. "Help!" I screamed, knowing it was useless. There was no one around for miles. "Somebody, please!" My cries were met only by the creature's guttural growls, growing louder as it gained on me. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the searing pain in my leg and the dizziness threatening to overwhelm me. I had to keep going. I had to survive. In my panic, I didn't see the fallen tree branch until it was too late. My foot caught on it and I went down hard, crying out as my wounded leg buckled beneath me. I hit the forest floor with a sickening thud, the taste of dirt and blood filling my mouth. "No, no, no," I whimpered, trying desperately to push myself up. But my arms were shaking too badly and my injured leg refused to cooperate. I rolled onto my back, leaves and twigs sticking to my blood-soaked clothes. And there it was, the creature's massive shadow looming over me. I could smell its foul breath, see the saliva dripping from its yellowed fangs. This was it. This was how I was going to die. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the killing blow. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure to whom. Maybe to my family, who would never know what happened to me. Maybe to myself, for coming to this godforsaken cabin in the first place. But the blow never came. Instead, I heard a curious snort. I cracked open one eye, then the other, hardly daring to breathe. The creature was still there, but it had taken a step back. Its head was tilted to one side, those terrifying red eyes studying me with what almost looked like curiosity. For a moment, we stayed like that. Me sprawled on the forest floor, the creature standing over me. I could hear my own ragged breathing, see the steam from the creature's breath in the cool night air. And then, slowly, it began to retreat. I watched, stunned, as it lumbered back into the woods. The shadows swallowed it up, but I could still hear the sound of breaking branches as it moved away. For several long minutes, I didn't move. I was afraid that any sound, any movement, might bring the creature back. But as the forest settled into an eerie calm, I realized it was truly gone. Wincing, I pushed myself up into a sitting position. Every part of my body ached, and my injured leg was a throbbing mess of pain. But I was alive. Somehow, inexplicably, I had survived. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. In the darkness, all the trees looked the same. I had no idea which direction I had come from or which way led back to the cabin. Not that I wanted to go back there. Ever. "Okay," I muttered to myself, my voice sounding strange in the quiet forest. "Think, Samantha. You need to get help." I remembered there was a highway about 5 miles east of the cabin. If I could make it there, I might be able to flag down a car. But which way was east? I looked up at the sky, trying to remember what little I knew about navigation by stars. But the forest canopy was too thick. I could barely see any stars at all. "Screw it," I said, picking a direction at random. "Any way is better than staying here." I used a nearby tree to pull myself to my feet, biting back a scream as pain shot through my leg. Once I was upright, I took a tentative step. Then another. It hurt like hell. But I could move. As I limped through the forest, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see those glowing red eyes following me. But there was nothing, just darkness and silence. I don't know how long I walked. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the endless expanse of trees. My leg had gone from searing pain to a dull, constant throb. I was pretty sure I was leaving a trail of blood behind me, but I tried not to think about that. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, I saw it, a glimmer of light through the trees. At first, I thought I was hallucinating, but as I got closer, I realized it was real. The highway, relief flooded through me, giving me a second wind. I pushed through the last of the underbrush, stumbling out onto the shoulder of the road. In the distance, I could see headlights approaching. I waved my arms frantically, ignoring the pain the movement caused. "Hey!" I shouted. "Stop! Please stop!" The car slowed, then pulled over. A middle-aged man got out, his eyes widening as he took in my battered appearance. "Oh my God," he said. "What happened to you?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again. How could I possibly explain what I'd been through? Who would believe me? I was attacked, I finally managed. In the woods. Please, I need to get to a hospital. The man nodded, already moving to help me into his car. Of course, just hang on, I'll get you help." As we drove away, I looked back at the dark line of trees. For a moment, I thought I saw a large, shadowy figure at the forest's edge. But then we turned a corner and it was gone. I leaned back in the seat, exhaustion finally overtaking me. I was safe, for now. But I knew this wasn't over. The memory of those glowing red eyes, of that bone-chilling roar, would stay with me forever. And somewhere out there, in the depths of the forest, the creature was still lurking, waiting, watching. I closed my eyes, dreading the moment when I'd have to tell my story. Because I knew deep down that no one would ever believe me. As I lay trembling on the forest floor, the full weight of what had just happened began to sink in. The adrenaline that had fueled my escape was fading fast, leaving behind a searing pain in my leg that was almost unbearable. Every breath I took sent shockwaves of agony through my body, and I could feel warm blood still oozing from the wound where that thing had sunk its teeth into me. "Get up," I whispered to myself, my voice hoarse from screaming. "You have to get up, Samantha." But my body refused to cooperate. I lay there, leaves and twigs digging into my back, staring up at the canopy of trees above me. The forest that had once seemed so peaceful now felt oppressive, as if it was closing in around me. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent my heart racing, convinced that the creature was coming back to finish what it had started. I'm not sure how long I lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness, but eventually, the sound of running water penetrated the fog of pain and fear that had enveloped me. A stream. There was a stream nearby. With a Herculean effort, I rolled onto my stomach, biting back a scream as the movement sent fresh waves of agony through my injured leg. Using my arms, I began to drag myself towards the sound of water. Every inch felt like a mile, but I forced myself to keep going. I had to clean my wound, had to try to stop the bleeding. When I finally reached the stream, I nearly wept with relief. The cool water felt like heaven against my skin as I plunged my injured leg into it. The clear water quickly turned red with my blood, but I didn't care. I scooped handful after handful onto my wound, rinsing away the dirt and debris. As I tended to my injury, I couldn't stop my mind from replaying the terrifying encounter. The creature's savage roar echoed in my ears, drowning out even the sound of the rushing stream. I could still see its glowing red eyes, feel its hot breath on my face. It had been so close, so terrifyingly real. "It can't be real," I muttered to myself, shaking my head. "Bigfoot isn't real. It can't be." But the pain in my leg, the torn flesh, and the still flowing blood told a different story. Whatever had attacked me was very real and very dangerous. With trembling hands, I tore strips from my shirt to create a makeshift bandage. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. As I wrapped my leg, I tried to think logically about what to do next. I needed help, that much was clear. But how could I explain what had happened? Who would believe me? The cabin. I had to get back to the cabin. There was a phone there, and first aid supplies. It was my best chance. Getting to my feet was an ordeal that left me gasping and sweating. My injured leg could barely support any weight, and every step sent jolts of pain through my entire body. But I gritted my teeth and forced myself to move, using trees for support as I slowly made my way back in the direction I thought the cabin was. The journey back seemed to take an eternity. The forest, which I had once found so beautiful and peaceful, now felt like a malevolent presence. Every shadow held the potential for danger, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I finally saw the cabin through the trees, I almost cried with relief. I stumbled the last few yards, collapsing onto the porch with a groan of pain. For a long moment I just lay there, my cheek pressed against the rough wood, gazing out at the still, ominous forest. "You're okay," I whispered to myself. "You made it. You're safe now." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't true. The creature was still out there, somewhere in those woods, and I had no idea if it would come back. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, which had miraculously survived the ordeal in my pocket. I dialed 911, my heart pounding as I waited for someone to answer. "911, what's your emergency?" A calm voice came through the speaker. I opened my mouth to respond, but for a moment no words came out. How could I possibly explain what had happened? I've been attacked," I finally managed, my voice quivering. "I'm at a cabin in the woods off Route 7. I'm hurt. My leg. There's a lot of blood." "Okay, ma'am, I'm dispatching an ambulance to your location now," the operator said. "Can you tell me what attacked you? Was it an animal?" I hesitated. This was the moment of truth. Would they believe me? It was big," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Bigger than a bear. It walked on two legs. It had red eyes and it roared. Oh God, the sound it made." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When the operator spoke again, her voice was carefully neutral. "All right, ma'am. The ambulance is on its way. Can you stay on the line with me until they arrive?" I nodded, then remembered she couldn't see me. Yes, I can do that." As I waited for help to arrive, I couldn't stop my eyes from darting to the tree line, searching for any sign of movement. The creature's roar still echoed in my ears, and I knew that even if I survived this night, the memory of what I'd experienced would haunt me forever. And as the first sounds of sirens reached my ears, I realized with a sinking feeling that this was just the beginning. Soon, I would have to try to convince others of what I'd seen. The flashing lights of the police car and ambulance cast an eerie glow over the cabin's porch where I sat, wrapped in a shock blanket. My leg throbbed relentlessly, a constant reminder of the nightmarish encounter I'd just survived. As the paramedics tended to my wounds, a police officer approached, notepad in hand. "I'm Officer Johnson," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Can you tell me what happened here, ma'am?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the disbelief I knew was coming. "I was attacked," I began, my voice shaking. By a creature in the woods." Officer Johnson's eyebrows raised slightly. "A creature? Can you describe it?" I nodded, closing my eyes as the terrifying image flooded back. It was massive, taller than any man I've ever seen, covered in thick matted fur, and its eyes... I shuddered. Its eyes were glowing red. When I opened my eyes again, I saw exactly what I'd feared. Skepticism etched across Officer Johnson's face. His eyes had narrowed, and he was regarding me with a mix of confusion and disbelief. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "are you saying that Bigfoot attacked you?" The way he said it with barely concealed derision made my heart sink. "I know how it sounds," I said desperately, "but I'm telling you the truth. It was real. It attacked me. Look at my leg." Officer Johnson glanced at my bandaged leg, then back to his notepad. "And you're sure it wasn't a bear? We get a lot of bear sightings in these parts." I shook my head vehemently. "No, it wasn't a bear. It walked on two legs. It roared." Oh God, the sound it made. I trailed off, the memory of that bone-chilling roar sending shivers down my spine. Uh-huh, Officer Johnson muttered, jotting something down. The skepticism in his voice was unmistakable. Please, I begged, you have to believe me. It's still out there. You need to search the area. There must be some evidence. Officer Johnson cut me off with a wave of his hand. Ma'am, we'll do a standard sweep of the area, but I gotta be honest with you. We're not going to find Bigfoot out there. But, I started to protest, but he continued. Now I gotta ask, have you been drinking tonight? Any recreational substances I should know about? I felt my face flush with anger and embarrassment. No, I haven't been drinking. I'm not on drugs. I know what I saw. Officer Johnson sighed, his expression softening slightly. Look, ma'am, I understand you've been through a traumatic experience, but Bigfoot? Come on. You gotta admit, it sounds pretty far-fetched. I know how it sounds, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But I'm telling you the truth. He regarded me for a long moment, then shook his head. Ma'am, I think you may have had one too many glasses of wine out here in the woods. It's easy to let your imagination run wild in a place like this, especially at night. His patronizing tone was the final straw. I felt tears of frustration welling up in my eyes. I wasn't drinking, I insisted, and I'm not imagining things. Why won't you believe me? Officer Johnson closed his notepad with a snap. We'll file a report about the attack, but I'm going to be straight with you. Without any concrete evidence, there's not much we can do. My advice? Get some rest, let the docs patch you up and try to put this behind you. As he spoke, one of the paramedics approached. We're ready to transport her to the hospital now, she said to Officer Johnson. He nodded. All right, let's get you to that ambulance, he said to me, offering his arm for support. As we made our way across the yard, I couldn't help but cast one last glance at the forest. The trees loomed dark and menacing, hiding who knows what in their shadowy depths. I shuddered, knowing that somewhere in there the creature was still lurking. Please, I said, making one last desperate attempt. You have to warn people, it's dangerous out there. Officer Johnson helped me into the ambulance, his expression a mix of pity and exasperation. Ma'am, the only danger out there is letting your imagination get the better of you. Now get some rest and try not to worry about mythical creatures, all right? As the ambulance doors closed, I felt a wave of despair wash over me. They didn't believe me. No one was going to believe me. The horrifying truth of what had transpired in those woods would remain my burden to bear alone. The ambulance started moving, carrying me away from the cabin, away from the forest, and away from the scene of my terrifying encounter. But as we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The memory of those glowing red eyes, of that bone-chilling roar, was seared into my mind. I closed my eyes, exhaustion finally overtaking me. But even as I drifted off, I knew that my ordeal was far from over. The creature was still out there and no one believed me. How could I warn people? How could I protect others from the horror I'd experienced? As consciousness slipped away, one thought echoed in my mind. I had survived the attack, but now I faced a different kind of battle. The fight to be believed. And somehow that seemed almost as daunting as facing the creature itself. The sterile hospital room felt like a stark contrast to the wild, terrifying forest I had just escaped. The harsh fluorescent lights made me squint as the doctor carefully examined my leg. The pain was still intense, but it was nothing compared to the fear that still gripped my heart. Can you tell us exactly what happened? The doctor asked, his voice gentle but his eyes betraying a hint of skepticism. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the disbelief I knew was coming. I was attacked, I began, my voice shaking slightly. In the woods, near my cabin. It was a creature. Massive, covered in fur with glowing red eyes. The doctor's hands paused in their work, and he exchanged a glance with the nurse. I could see the doubt in their eyes, but I pressed on. I know how it sounds, but I swear it's true. It was Bigfoot. It attacked me, and I barely managed to escape. The nurse couldn't suppress a small chuckle. Bigfoot, huh? She said, her tone light but disbelieving. That's a new one. I felt my face flush with frustration and embarrassment. I'm not making this up, I insisted. Why would I lie about something like this? The doctor finished bandaging my leg and straightened up, his expression a mixture of concern and doubt. Ms. Johnson, I understand you've been through a traumatic experience, but are you sure it wasn't perhaps a bear or even a particularly large man? I shook my head vehemently. No, it wasn't a bear or a man, it was something else. Something that shouldn't exist, but it does. Please, you have to believe me. The nurse patted my hand in a gesture that was probably meant to be comforting but felt patronizing. Honey, sometimes our minds play tricks on us when we're scared. It's perfectly normal. But it wasn't a trick, I exclaimed, my voice rising. It was real. There's a dangerous creature out there in those woods. You need to contact the authorities, send search teams to investigate. People need to be warned. The doctor and nurse exchanged another glance, this one filled with concern. Not for the threat I was describing, but for my mental state. Ma'am, the doctor said, his tone softening to one you might use with a child. I think what's best right now is for you to get some rest. You've been through a lot and your body needs time to heal. But, I started to protest, but he held up a hand to stop me. We'll run some tests, make sure there's no head trauma or anything else that might be causing confusion. For now, try to relax, you're safe here. As they turned to leave, I made one last desperate attempt. Please, I begged, just contact the forest rangers or something. Have them check the area. There must be some evidence. The doctor paused at the door, his expression a mixture of pity and exasperation. Ms. Johnson, I assure you, if there was a dangerous creature in those woods, we'd know about it. Now please, try to get some sleep. With that, they left, closing the door behind them. I could hear their muffled voices in the hallway, no doubt discussing my delusions. Alone in the quiet hospital room, I felt a wave of despair wash over me. They didn't believe me. No one was going to believe me. The creature was still out there, and I had no way to prove it, no way to warn anyone. I turned my gaze to the window, staring out at the distant tree line visible on the horizon. The forest looked peaceful from here, bathed in the soft light of the setting sun. But I knew the truth. I knew what lurked in those woods. The memory of the creature's glowing red eyes flashed in my mind, sending a shiver down my spine. I could still hear its bone-chilling roar, still feel the terror of those moments when I thought for sure I was going to die. How could I just forget about it? How could I pretend it never happened? The wounds on my body were real, even if no one believed how I got them. As night fell and the room darkened, I found myself unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the creature looming over me, its massive form blocking out the moonlight, its hot breath on my face. I knew I would never feel truly safe again. Not with the knowledge that such a creature existed, that it was out there somewhere, perhaps waiting for its next victim. But what could I do? Who would believe me? The police had dismissed my story, and now even the medical professionals thought I was delusional. I was alone with this terrifying knowledge, with no way to prove what I had seen, no way to protect others from the danger lurking in the woods. As I lay there in the darkness, my mind raced with questions. What if the creature came looking for me? What if it attacked someone else? How could I live with myself if I didn't do something, anything, to try and prevent another attack? But with each question came the crushing realization that there was nothing I could do. I had no evidence, no proof. Just my word against the skepticism of everyone around me. The night stretched on endlessly, filled with fitful dozing and terrifying nightmares. When the first light of dawn finally crept through the window, I made a decision. I couldn't just let this go. I couldn't pretend it never happened. Even if no one believed me, I had to try to find some way to prove what I had seen, to warn others of the danger. As a nurse came in to check on me, I steeled myself for another day of disbelief and dismissal, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. The creature was still out there, and somehow, some way, I had to make people believe me. The alternative, doing nothing and risking more attacks, was simply unthinkable. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge not only my sanity, but everything I thought I knew about the world around me. The drive back to the cabin felt like a journey into the heart of my own personal nightmare. Every tree that lined the winding road seemed to loom over me, their shadows reaching out like grasping claws. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, and more than once I considered turning back, fleeing to the relative safety of the city. But I couldn't. I needed to face this to prove to myself that I wasn't going crazy. As I pulled up to the cabin, the silence hit me like a physical force. No birds chirping, no wind rustling through the leaves. Just an oppressive, eerie quiet that seemed to press in on me from all sides. I sat in the car for a long moment, steeling myself to go inside. Finally, I forced myself to move. Each step towards the cabin door felt like wading through molasses, my body fighting against the memories of terror that flooded my mind. The key trembled in my hand as I unlocked the door, half expecting to find the interior torn apart, evidence of the creature's presence. But everything was just as I had left it, eerily undisturbed. I stepped inside, and immediately the floorboards creaked under my weight. I jumped, my heart racing, before realizing it was just the normal sounds of an old cabin. But now, every little noise set me on edge. The settling of the house, the gentle tapping of a branch against a window. Each sound sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system, my mind instantly conjuring images of the creature returning to finish what it had started. I found myself pacing restlessly, unable to sit still, unable to relax. Every few minutes I'd find myself drawn to the windows, peering out into the surrounding forest, searching for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, just trees and shadows and the growing certainty that I was losing my mind. Unable to bear the isolation any longer, I reached for my phone. I needed to talk to someone, anyone who might believe me. My fingers hovered over the contact list before finally settling on Sarah, my best friend since college. If anyone would understand, it would be her. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. "Sam, is everything okay? I heard you were in the hospital." Her voice, so familiar and comforting, nearly brought me to tears. "Sarah, something happened. Something terrible. I need you to believe me." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Of course, Sam. What's going on?" I took a deep breath and launched into my story, recounting every terrifying detail of my encounter with the creature. As I spoke, I could feel the fear and panic rising in my chest again, my voice growing more frantic with each word. When I finally finished, there was a long silence. Then, Sarah's voice came back, hesitant and tinged with concern. "Bigfoot? Really, Sam? You need to stop watching those conspiracy shows and get some rest." My heart sank. Even Sarah, my closest friend, didn't believe me. "It's not a conspiracy theory, Sarah. It happened. I saw it. It attacked me." "Sam, listen to yourself," Sarah said gently. "I know you've been through something traumatic, but Bigfoot? Come on. Maybe it was a bear, or—" "It wasn't a bear," I shouted, frustration boiling over. "Why won't anyone believe me?" "Sam, I'm worried about you," Sarah said, her voice now laced with genuine concern. "Maybe you should come stay with me for a while. Get away from that cabin, clear your head." I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "No, I need to be here. I need to prove it was real." "Sam, I have to go." I cut her off, unable to bear her skepticism any longer. I'll call you later." I hung up before she could respond, tossing the phone onto the couch. The silence of the cabin pressed in on me once again, now feeling even more oppressive after the failed attempt at connection. As the day wore on, I found myself retreating further into isolation. I ignored the buzzing of my phone, knowing it would just be more concerned friends and family, none of whom would believe me. I couldn't bear to face their doubt, their pitying looks, their well-meaning but misguided attempts to rationalize what had happened. Night fell, and with it came a bone-deep exhaustion. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the creature's glowing red eyes, heard its bone-chilling roar. Sleep, it seemed, would be yet another luxury denied to me. I found myself huddled on the couch, a blanket wrapped tightly around me, staring out the window into the darkness of the forest. The memory of the creature's savage attack played on repeat in my mind, every detail as vivid as if it were happening all over again. In that moment, the true weight of my isolation hit me. No one believed me. No one understood the horror I had experienced, the terror that now colored every moment of my existence. I was alone with this knowledge, this trauma, with no way to prove what had happened and no one to turn to for support. As I sat there in the dark, I realized that the creature had taken more from me than just my sense of safety. It had stolen my peace of mind, my relationships, my very connection to the world around me. I was adrift in a sea of disbelief and fear, with no shore in sight. But as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, I made a decision. I couldn't live like this. I couldn't let the fear and isolation consume me. Somehow, someway, I had to find proof of what I had seen. I had to make people believe me. Little did I know this determination would lead me down a path even darker and more terrifying than the one I had already traveled. The creature was still out there, and my quest for truth was about to awaken something far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The darkness of the night pressed against the cabin windows like a living thing, suffocating and oppressive. I had finally managed to drift into a fitful sleep, my body exhausted from the constant state of fear and vigilance. But even in sleep, I couldn't escape the horror that had become my reality. Suddenly, a sound pierced through the veil of my restless slumber, a distant, bone-chilling roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cabin. I jolted awake, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. For a moment, I sat frozen in bed, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "No, no, no," I whispered, my voice trembling. "It can't be back. It can't be real." But I knew, deep in my bones, that it was real. That sound, that terrible, primal roar, was unmistakable. It was the same sound that had haunted my nightmares ever since the attack. I scrambled out of bed, my legs tangling in the sheets and nearly sending me crashing to the floor. I stumbled to the window, my hands shaking as I pulled back the curtain. The forest outside was a sea of inky blackness, the towering trees mere silhouettes against the night sky. I pressed my face against the cool glass, straining my eyes to catch any glimpse of movement, any sign of the creature. But there was nothing. Just darkness and shadows and the oppressive silence that had fallen in the wake of that chilling roar. "Where are you?" I whispered, my breath fogging the window. "I know you're out there." As if in response, a branch snapped somewhere in the darkness. I jerked back from the window, my heart leaping into my throat. Was it just the natural sounds of the forest, or was it something more sinister? I backed away from the window, my eyes darting around the room. Suddenly, the cabin felt like a trap. The walls seemed to close in around me, and every shadow held the potential for danger. Sleep was now a distant memory. I paced the cabin restlessly, jumping at every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside. My mind raced with terrifying possibilities. Was the creature out there, watching the cabin? Was it waiting for me to let my guard down? As the first rays of dawn began to creep through the curtains, painting the room in a pale, ghostly light, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here any longer. This cabin, once my sanctuary, had become a prison of fear and terrible memories. "I have to leave," I said aloud, my voice sounding strange and hollow in the quiet room. "I can't do this anymore." With shaking hands, I began to pack a bag. I threw clothes in haphazardly, not caring what I grabbed. All that mattered was getting out, getting away from this place and the horrors it now held. As I zipped up the bag, my eyes fell on the bandages still wrapped around my leg. The wounds from the attack were healing, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would remain with me forever. I took one last look around the cabin, memories flooding back. The peaceful mornings spent on the porch with a cup of coffee, the quiet evenings by the fireplace with a good book, all of it now tainted by the terror of that one nightmarish encounter. "Goodbye," I whispered, a lump forming in my throat. Despite everything, a part of me mourned the loss of this place that had once brought me so much joy. I rushed to my car, throwing the bag in the back seat. As I slid into the driver's seat, I couldn't help but glance back at the cabin one last time. A mixture of fear and relief washed over me. I knew I would never feel safe here again, but leaving felt like admitting defeat. The engine roared to life, shattering the morning silence. As I began to drive away, a movement in my rearview mirror caught my eye. I slammed on the brakes, my heart leaping into my throat. There, at the edge of the forest, I saw something. A dark shape, massive and hulking, that seemed to melt back into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared, and for just a moment I could have sworn I saw a pair of glowing red eyes watching me. "No," I gasped, my knuckles turning white on the steering wheel. "It can't be." I pressed down on the accelerator, the car lurching forward. As I sped away from the cabin, away from the forest and all its terrors, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The memory of those glowing red eyes burned in my mind, a constant reminder of the horror I had faced. Even as the cabin disappeared from view, replaced by the familiar sights of civilization, I knew that this nightmare was far from over. The creature was still out there, somewhere in those dark woods, and a part of me knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that our paths would cross again. As I drove on, putting more and more distance between myself and the forest, I tried to convince myself that I was safe now, that I was leaving the horror behind. But deep down, I knew the truth. The real haunting wasn't tied to that cabin or those woods. It was inside me now, a part of me, and no matter how far I ran, I could never truly escape it. The road stretched out before me, leading to an uncertain future. But one thing was clear: my life would never be the same again. The creature had changed everything, and I was left to navigate this new, terrifying reality alone. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, I drove on, my mind filled with unanswered questions and the lingering dread of what might come next. The weeks following my encounter with the creature passed in a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. Every sudden noise, every shadow in the corner of my eye sent my heart racing. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see the towering, hairy figure of the beast lurking behind me. Even in the safety of my apartment, miles away from the cabin and the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The memory of the attack played on repeat in my mind, as vivid and terrifying as the moment it happened. The creature's roar echoed in my thoughts, a constant reminder of the horror I had faced. I tried to go about my daily routine, to convince myself that I was simply being paranoid. "It wasn't real," I'd mutter to myself as I made coffee in the morning, my hands shaking slightly. It couldn't have been real. But then I'd catch sight of the scars on my leg, still angry and red, and the doubt would creep back in. Those wounds were real, tangible evidence of what I had experienced. No matter how much I tried to rationalize it away, the truth was etched into my very flesh. One afternoon, I found myself staring at the scars in the bathroom mirror, tracing the jagged lines with my finger. "How can I move on from this?" I whispered to my reflection, seeing the haunted look in my own eyes. I tried everything to distract myself. I threw myself into work, spent time with friends, even started seeing a therapist, but nothing could fully banish the lingering sense of unease that had taken root in my soul. "Tell me about the nightmares," my therapist said during one session, her voice gentle but probing. I hesitated, knowing how it would sound. I dream about the creature, about being back in those woods, feeling its hot breath on my neck, hearing its roar. She nodded, jotting something down in her notebook. "And how do these dreams make you feel?" "Terrified," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper, "but also confused, angry. Why me? Why did this happen to me?" She looked at me with sympathy. "It's natural to seek meaning in traumatic experiences. But sometimes there isn't a deeper reason. Sometimes bad things just happen." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to accept that it had all been some freak accident, a bear attack blown out of proportion by my terrified mind. But deep down, I knew the truth. What I had seen that night in the forest was something beyond explanation, something that shouldn't exist in our world of science and reason. As the weeks wore on, I found myself unable to sleep for more than a few hours at a time. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing red orbs staring back at me. I'd jolt awake, drenched in sweat, the echo of the creature's roar ringing in my ears. One night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and willing sleep to come, I heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold and my heart stop in my chest. In the distance, carried on the night wind, was a roar. That same bone-chilling primal sound that had haunted my nightmares for weeks. For a moment, I lay frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. It couldn't be. It was impossible. I was miles away from the forest, safe in my apartment in the city. But there it was again, closer this time, unmistakable. Without conscious thought, I was out of bed, grabbing my keys and phone. My hands shook so badly I could barely unlock my door. As I stumbled down the stairs to the parking lot, my mind raced. How had it found me? What did it want? I threw myself into my car, fumbling with the keys. As the engine roared to life, I caught a glimpse of movement in my rearview mirror. Something large, something impossibly fast, moving at the edge of the parking lot. "No, no, no," I muttered, slamming the car into reverse. I peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching on the asphalt. As I sped down the empty streets, my heart pounding in my chest, I realized I had no idea where I was going. All I knew was that I had to get away, had to put as much distance as possible between myself and that thing. The city lights blurred past as I drove, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Every shadow on the road looked like a hulking figure, every tree like a potential hiding place for the creature. I found myself taking random turns, doubling back, trying to lose any potential pursuit. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, I finally allowed myself to slow down. I pulled into a rest stop, my whole body shaking with exhaustion and leftover adrenaline. As I sat there watching the sunrise, I realized that I could never go back. Not to my apartment, not to that town, and certainly not to that forest. The creature had taken so much from me already. My peace of mind, my sense of safety, my ability to trust my own perceptions. But I refused to let it take my life. As I started the car again, pointing it towards the interstate and whatever lay beyond, I made a silent vow. I would survive this. I would find a way to move on, to rebuild my life. But as I drove away, leaving behind everything I had known, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't truly an escape. The memory of the savage attack was forever etched in my mind, a haunting reminder that sometimes the monsters we fear are all too real. And somewhere out there in the dark depths of the forest, the creature still lurked, waiting. The road stretched out before me, leading to an uncertain future. But one thing was clear. My life would never be the same again.